we're always able to work with anyone within the value chain. It's kind of funny. This is one of the great things about being on the board. It doesn't matter how difficult some of the discussions or some of the conversation is around the board table. We're always able to go and have a beer afterwards type thing, because we got to support the barley industry, right? And I think everyone sort of enjoys that, and the fact that we can have different opinions, but it's still very respected opinions on both sides. We bring a lot of just kind of some basic common sense and basic sort of, well, what makes sense for producers today?
Welcome to the BarleyBin. SaskBarley's goal is to take you right into the barley bin, not a hopper bin or a bin with in-floor augers, but the kind you'd spend a bit of time shoveling, getting itchy. It's worth it for the pint or steak afterwards, or a golden nugget you sometimes find uncovering itchy topics.
I'm your host, Mitchell Japp. This episode, I'm going to be talking with Chad Ferguson, who's a director on SaskBarley. We're going to be diving into the variety registration process. Most specifically, the committee that facilitates the testing and does the review of data prior to making recommendations for new varieties. For barley in Western Canada, the committee is called the Prairie Recommending Committee for Oat and Barley, or PRCOB. Welcome, Chad.
Hello, thanks for having me. Welcome.
Glad you could be here. Why don't you start out, give a little bit of introduction of what your background is and how long you've been involved with PRCOB?
So I got involved with PRCOB basically right as soon as I became a director with SaskBarley. I wanted to be involved in all the places that producer voices can be heard. So that's going on 2 years now. I farm in Northeast Saskatchewan and obviously grow lots of barley and other crops as well. And I've been doing that for quite a few years. So have a good sense of different varieties and things that work in certain areas geographically and for different markets as well. I feel like I have a pretty good background to participate in the conversations and add some opinions.
Awesome. I've been a member of PRCOB, I guess most recently since I joined SaskBarley in 2020. So I joined the PRCOB committee myself and have been involved there since that time. Prior to that, when I was in a previous role with the provincial government, I was a member of the Prairie Recommending Committee for wheat, rye, and triticale, and an associate member of PRCOB. And that time there, I did a 3-year, 4-year stretch as the chair of the Prairie Grain Development Committee, which is, we'll talk about a little bit more. But between the two of us, I think we should be able to provide some decent background information on what the committee is and what they do.
Yep.
Chad, why don't you start off talking about the Prairie Grain Development Committee from your perspective, and how does PRCOB fit in with the Prairie Grain Development Committee?
There's lots of, I guess the first thing is there's lots of moving pieces to the entire group and the idea behind it. But really at the end of the day, the idea is we want to make sure that we maintain the quality and characteristics of barley varieties for producers that are growing these. And we have to take everything into consideration, from geography, markets that may be interested in buying them. There's a lot of moving parts. And so there's many different subcommittees involved in this, and everybody tries to do their due diligence on each particular aspect, whether that be quality or agronomy or disease, to make sure that we get it right and that we're advancing the agronomics and these varieties that are directly benefiting farmers that use them.
Yeah, I think that's the key statement there at the end, is benefiting the farmers that use the varieties. Absolutely. From my background, I maybe talk a little bit more about the Prairie Grain Development Committee. It's been around for several years. The different committees have evolved over time before I was involved with them. So as long as I've been there, it's been the Prairie Grain Development Committee. It's the overarching committee that brings together and facilitates the meetings that happen between 4 different recommending committees on the prairies: PRCOB, Prairie Recommending Committee for Oat and Barley, the one that I was previously involved in, the Prairie Recommending Committee for wheat, rye, and triticale, the Prairie Recommending Committee for oilseeds, and the Prairie Recommending Committee for pulse and special crops. So 4 different recommending committees, all focused on Western Canada. And the Prairie Grain Development Committee involves members of each of those 4 Prairie Recommending Committees, and their primary mandate is to facilitate that meeting that happens every year, late February and early March, where the data gets looked at to review from all the different lines of testing that get done, like you say, across different disciplines, agronomy, disease, and quality. And that comes together and to make sure that these meetings happen each year. You touched on the different subcommittees or evaluation teams on the PRCOB, Chad. You mentioned agronomy, disease, and quality. What connection do you have to any of those teams?
So currently I'm part of the quality team. So we're analyzing the specifics of malting varieties, all of the specific yield parameters that the maltsters and the brewing industry is looking at. But at the same time, it's not limited to that. We're also looking at quality aspects for the other end users, which may also include the feed or food sectors as well. And one of the key things with quality that we really try and focus on to try and be efficient and to try and make a big difference is that we look at varieties that have been recommended in the past, and we look at what their track record has been, where they've been used, how far they've went, whether that be domestic or international. And we have an overarching rule that these varieties that we're putting money and effort and time into, they have to be better than the last ones we have. And sometimes, depending on the characteristics, that may only be 0.5% protein here or different enzyme activity levels and certain things like that. But there are lots of varieties that come in for recommendation, and some of them just clearly there was a lot of time and effort put into them, but they don't have any advantage to move it along any further. So we try to weed those ones out early and focus on the ones that have the most potential for the right reasons. So it's really neat to be on the quality team because there's a broad range of individuals on that team from all over North America, and that have a little bit of input here and there on what they think should be good or should be bad. And you get a really good perspective of the amount of people and the amount of experience that's at that table recommending these varieties.
What kind of representation across the value chain is there within that committee?
So we've got brewers, maltsters, farmers, people that work in the industry, some in the commissions, and there's international buyers that could be on these groups as well. The sky's the limit, and that's what we want to focus on, is making sure that there's a wide range of individuals on there with a wide range of experience so that there's nothing that can be missed.
And who's doing the testing for the quality parameters out of these trials?
So that'd be the CMBTC would be doing the quality, and that way everything is consistent and everybody's looking at the same data from the same system so that we can make strategic decisions.
So the CMBTC, the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Center, and is the Canadian Grain Commission involved at any level as well?
Yes, definitely. We rely on them as well for an overarching view of everything that's there and making sure that everything's followed properly as well.
So your experience is primarily on the quality evaluation team. I can speak a little bit to mine from the agronomy evaluation team. That team, it is looking at all the characteristics I think that are important to farmers from a production perspective. So yield is obviously a critical component of the evaluation team, but they're also looking at characteristics like resistance to lodging, height. They'll look at protein levels, which I know the quality team is also looking at as well. The days to maturity, days to heading. And so the number of parameters that are pulled together to be able to establish the characteristics of the variety. I think that the data that's collected in the registration process, it also feeds into farmer-facing publications across the prairies. So in Saskatchewan would be the Sask Seed Guide, and the subsection of that guide, the varieties of grain crops, where you can get the different data points that are of interest, like I say, resistance to lodging, height, and the different yields, which the yield is enhanced further with more localized data through the regional variety trials, but it all starts at the registration process. Do you have a sense from your time there, Chad, about, and neither of us are on the disease evaluation team, what's your perspective on where their contribution is?
With the disease team?
Yeah.
So the disease team is interesting because the individuals that are part of that team, I know some of them really well and some of them not as much, but I can definitely say for sure that the disease team's hard. Like, you put a variety up for recommendation for them and they take it very seriously and they do their due diligence on their testing. And it's amazing. Actually, you'll see some of the varieties that'll come through, and like our quality team will vote that we recommend it, and the agronomy team will look at their parameters and say, yeah, this looks like a really strong one. And you might have the disease team that says, absolutely not. We don't want this variety because it's very poor in all of the diseases that they've tested. So it's one of those things where you think you've got a variety that should go ahead with all three teams, and then one of the teams strikes it down. But that's why it's there, is we want to be hard. We want it to be difficult because we have a product that we all claim it's the best in the world, and I believe it is. And it's due to some of these processes that we have in place to make sure that we maintain that quality and that we're hard on the new varieties that are coming in. The disease team, it's hard to get a full recommendation from them because the disease part is very hard to overcome. It seems like they're all changing, and there's some new ones that have come about that have become more important over the last few years. And so that's an ever moving target, and it takes years to develop resistance and tools against them. So I'm glad that they are that hard, though, because we want to make sure that we protect that. The most important decision you can make is the seed you put in the ground. And if we can try and build all these things into the seed, we're going to start off with a win to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the disease team, they're looking perhaps a little bit differently at the data that they review than the other teams. They will have a check comparison, so a standard variety that's growing, or perhaps multiple checks. And when they're going through that process, they will be doing ratings, and they'll compare how the disease pressure is in the years that it's tested, how it compares against the known varieties, those established ones, and how they're reacting with the new lines. And they're going to come up with a rating. And we see those in the seed guides after a variety has been registered. But that rating is going to be anywhere from fully susceptible up to fully resistant. Now, fully resistant is not the same as immune. It's still a rating on a scale, and there's points in between, some susceptible, moderately susceptible, intermediate, moderately resistant, and resistant. And so with barley, for the 7 priority diseases that they're evaluating, they're looking for a minimum of an intermediate rating for those. So those priority diseases, I'm not going to list them all. Obviously, Fusarium head blights amongst those as a top disease in barley, also looking at net blotch and spot blotch and leaf diseases like that. And so to be able to, as you mentioned, Chad, to hit the target for across all 7 diseases is pretty challenging.
Yeah. And it seems like if you want to really push over to one and really focus on, say, maybe some particular disease you want to go after, there's always this give and take, because all these breeding efforts, while you gained in the disease side, now maybe it's really bad for lodging, or the yield potential went way down. And so you really have to pick and choose where you push and pull things to try and, I guess, get the best of it all if you can. But
yeah. So the 3 teams, they all individually are assessing the quality, the agronomy, and the disease resistance. They're looking for overall merit of the variety. And each of those teams comes forward with a recommendation, whether to support or not support registration for that varieties. And so, as you've experienced it, how do you take it? Because all those 3 teams come together on the last day, and they present their recommendations to the overall committee. So everybody's sitting in the room now, no longer representing their specific evaluation teams, are representing the overall PRCOB committee, and they're trying to make a best decision for the barley industry on a given variety, which may be strong in all 3, or maybe it's got a weakness in 1 or 2 of those different areas. What's your experience been trying to make those decisions for the best case forward for the barley industry and what the new variety potential is?
I think for that, when we get to that point, after each individual team has made an assessment, once we come together in the same room then to vote on these varieties, that's the first time that each team gets to see what the other team has recommended. So you see the long list of varieties that have come forward for recommendation, and you may have a few that you're okay with, but they weren't your favorite. And if you find that's the case with the other teams, then you feel a little more confident about, okay, I'm not the only one that's got this opinion. That's really good. You get to see everybody else's expertise come full there. So I like that, because it's just another way for checks and balances to happen. And you have to be realistic. Like I said before, like there are times when the agronomic team and the quality team may address certain issues and might say, yes, these are good for recommendation. And the disease team says, no, this is not a good idea. but it might be because of they might have 6 diseases that they're okay with, but there's one that they really aren't. And so they still are very cautious, saying we didn't hit a home run yet. It's close. And so then we have to look at that as a large committee and say, are we willing to put this variety through to go to the next step and to see if we can manage this disease? The other thing that can happen as well with this, once we've recommended these varieties and they've moved on to the next step, there's still a couple more years that happen after that. So there's still time to take these varieties and say, you know what, we made a mistake. We don't want to put this variety through anymore. And that happens, but that's because every year is a little bit different too.
Yeah, I distinctly remember one wheat variety that went through. And then as seed multiplication was occurring, it found out it was a little bit more susceptible to ergot than they had realized. And it got pulled off the shelf. No longer available because it didn't want to get that out in the marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. It's not as common, but from time to time, there's varieties that have, specifically quality characteristic for, let's say, the malting industry that a lot of buyers maybe aren't so keen on. That could be something like high protein. Maybe it's very, as we say in the industry, might be really hot, so it chits easily. So that's something that we look at for everybody. But there's some instances where some of the maltsters want a specific variety. And so as long as they have a market for that, there's a possibility that we could recommend those varieties for that market. But that's, there's a lot of moving pieces in that too.
Yeah. Recognition of the niche potential for a variety.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we want to try new things. We want to try new, we're looking at food, feed, and malt for the barley side. So you want to try and give everybody a chance to try those. But yet at the same time, you don't want to flood the market with tens of varieties just to try it. We want to make sure that we've narrowed it down to the best possible ones that we can have.
Yeah, because there's cost to get it to variety registration, but there's cost to multiply and get the seed available. And if there's too many of them, there's too many failures past registration, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these varieties are the initial crosses. When the breeders do these, they may not realize at the time that they've crossed a variety that's going to become the next greatest. That could be 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years from the time that initial cross is made in the lab or out in the field until that, variety is available for producers. So you've got to be very careful in each step.
Very much is a long process.
Yeah.
And I guess that'll lead into my next question. Is it too long a process?
It is too long in the sense that when you have certain varieties that happen and you look at the rest of the industry, and some other particular crops may have varieties that come out more frequently than what barley is. But again, like I said before, part of the problem is making sure that we maintain the quality. And sometimes it's not always about yield either. Like some of the varieties that we want to come out with, maybe the yield is only 1 or 2% better than the next variety. It doesn't chit as much. The disease is way better. It's 10 centimeters shorter, all these kinds of things. So we really want to analyze that stuff and make sure we can get to that. Yeah, I wish that we could do this in a 2 or 3 year rotation, but the chances of developing varieties that are, I'll say, significantly better than the next best that we already have, we're going to miss the mark a lot if we rush it too much. And the biggest thing on the malt side in particular is having market acceptance, because it's very touchy and very sensitive when the industry users that want these particular varieties, once they get that established, that's their recipe that they're using, and they create their own markets and their own customers that are going to buy their products from these varieties. And so if we change them too fast, that could have some market disruption too. All those things are part and parcel on the whole process. I think as technology gets better and we have different ways to do things out in the field, I think the timeline will go down. There is definitely some red tape and regulation that has to get put through as well. So there could be some work done on that. So we could narrow it down, but I think we want to do it. We want to do that efficiently as well too.
Yeah, and I think there's been some examples where demand has been there for a variety to move through that system faster. So if you are, as an industry, are willing to make the investment and say, we need a variety that meets this characteristics and we need it fast, you can do that. And you can multiply, you can use greenhouses through the multiple generations that the breeder has to work with. They use off-season nurseries. So they can get through their, what would be 10 to 12 years process just in the breeding and going through the different generations they have to do on their end before it gets to the system. that can be compressed significantly.
Yeah.
If there's a will and the funds to do so. And then moving through the variety registration system, that can be fairly fixed because you're getting data over time. And so for feed barley, it's 2 years. For malt barley, it's 3 years. But if there's a good understanding what the potential of variety is, the seed multiplication can be happening at the same time as it's going through variety registration. And there's potential where varieties can hit the marketplace as soon as the registration process is complete.
Yeah. And I know on the farm too, like we've tried over the years, we've tried multiple different varieties of feed and malt. And like when we're trying to try something else out, we don't generally go from all one variety to all the next variety. You put in a new variety in a small portion of the field or pick a smaller field and do some comparisons on your own farm. And 1 year you may try it and say, wow, this new variety is 5% better yield or whatever your numbers are. And so you try it again the second year and now they're the same. And you think, well, it was better last year. Why isn't it better this year? But no 2 years are the same. And so that's why these 2 and 3 year requirements to run these in the trials are so important, because geographically is important, but then we all remember the years where we've had droughts, we've had too wet. And so all these varieties perform in different environments. So we're just trying to get as much data as we can in as many different scenarios as we can to make sure that when these come out, that it's a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we covered pretty nicely how the system works and what the rationale is behind it. But as a farmer listening to the podcast or having just seen about the recommending committees a little bit in the past, they might be wondering, like, why is it worthwhile doing it this way? Why not just let anybody who wants to bring a variety forward, regardless of its characteristics, let them do that and stand on their own brand and let them go. And if the brand is good, they'll stand up, they'll deliver good varieties. Why is it better the way we're doing it here? Or maybe you don't think it is.
No, I think that there's potential on both sides, but the reason why this process we have in place now is so important is because I've said it again, like it maintains the quality of what the Canadian barley marketplace is. That's what we want to protect. We grow some beautiful crops and beautiful quality, and it's known internationally. It's very well known internationally that we have those. And there are other places in the world that produce high quality as well. But we want to maintain that, and we want to be able to have the potential to have a premium for that product. And that's somewhat more so focused on the malt side. Feed is also in that category where we produce some of the best feed that you can get anywhere in the world. And so we want to protect that. Now, for other people or industries or companies to come in with other varieties, yes, that could happen. There's potential and there's pros and cons to that as well. But at the same time, it's like I said before, with these varieties on the malt side, the varieties are very important because they know the maltsters know what quality they're getting and what parameters they're going to work with. In a good year, a bad year, they can find that recipe. But it also falls into the feed quality side too. And you want to know what your product is. And the biggest thing with selling a product in the volume that it is, you want to have consistency. Any other places that you go in the world where you're trying to source product, whether it's from the pharmaceutical world to food to industry, when you want multiples of products year after year, the biggest thing you're going after is consistency. And we want to maintain that with proper varieties and pure varieties that hold all those characteristics. So I think it's a good system. It's definitely involved. It definitely takes a long time. There are things that could be done to shorten that time frame, but I think it's worked out well. And there'll be lots of guys that have listened to the podcast and they'll say, yeah, I've tried 10 or 15 different varieties over the years. And it's interesting because there's lots of varieties that come out and they come out of this program, and without naming names, but everybody knows which ones they had. And it looks like it's going to be the next biggest one. And maybe 1 year it is. And then the next year you get the vibe that the maltsters said, no, it's not exactly what we're looking for. We want to try something else. So then you try a new variety. But as long as everybody goes into it a little bit slower and adopt these in the proper time frame, these varieties will come around. Look at Metcalf and Copeland, how long those were around. They're still great varieties, like from an end use perspective, but they just don't have the yield potential as some of these newer varieties have now. So we want to maintain that, but we also want to deliver increasing yield where we want to generate some more profit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that Canadian quality advantage that we have most notably on the malt barley side is absolutely critical. It gives a premium for the product internationally, and it helps move it around. It makes it very good markets for Canadian malt barley. There's a lot of the buyers of Canadian malt barley have access to other malt barley that they can get from other places in the world. They can source it faster and cheaper, but they want that quality advantage that comes from Canada. And to me, the variety registration system is a critical foundation of that. And the feed barley, the way it connects into that component to me is the disease resistance.
Yeah.
Making sure that those feed varieties are not out there proliferating disease that could start breaking down resistance on the malt side and leading to lower quality on the malt. So I think it's important that those feed varieties stay up there. And there's a little bit of consumer protection as well to know that the varieties coming out to the system have some good quality characteristics from a production perspective as well as disease resistance and quality. There's another tie-in too. We saw the release from the Global Institute for Food Security of the sustainability of Canadian barley and Saskatchewan barley compared to other places in the world. And it stands well above any of the markets they compared to in terms of sustainability. And having good disease resistance is a component of that, because there's farmers out there that are going to be spraying barley potentially a couple of times with a fungicide. Some parts in the world, that's 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily even those really wet environments that are growing extremely high yields. It's areas where they don't have a system like this to support varieties coming to the marketplace that have excellent disease resistance.
Yeah. And it puts a lot of dependence then if all these varieties, when you talk about disease, if they were all susceptible to all the diseases and we had, products and fungicides that were able to offset those, that means the farmers in the field, like in the wetter areas, other parts of the world, they are in there lots for those reasons. But even in Saskatchewan, we don't want to be out there 4 or 5 times in a row just to try and control diseases, right? So it's so important that's already built into the seed, and it saves farmers money. It saves them time. It's less products being used so that we can use them when we need to use them at the right point in time. And it's a win-win. So
yeah,
I would suggest anybody, if you haven't heard about the Global Institute for Food Security, the sustainability report that was released a little while ago regarding Saskatchewan barley, I would urge you to check it out. It's a great report. It is detailed, but just puts some more, weight behind the fact that we hope and we say, and we're biased, of course, because we're Saskatchewan producers, but we produce some of the best barley in the world. And the GIFT study proves that with scientific knowledge. So it's a very good report to reference to.
Absolutely. So SaskBarley, one of the core activities of the commission is to fund research. We've invested over 70% of overall costs the last four or maybe even 5 years now into research. How does that connect with this variety registration system?
I think it starts with what kind of research are we funding? That when we say research, like that's a pretty big umbrella that we can follow. There's just so many things that we can send it to, but we want to fund research that's going to benefit the farmer in the end. And there are some projects that, they're multi-year. We've got some that are year to year and some that could be 5. There's ones that could go on for 10 or longer. And so we really take a close look at those to see which ones are the best ones that are going to be the best for the long term. And then we, of course, have the shorter ones in there for different things. But the research is just pivotal because we can make much better decisions when we've got scientific data to back it up in our own backyard, as well as other provinces, other parts of the world. Some of the research data that we have may come from different places, but it's all trying to tie that all together and use those funds efficiently and for the right reasons, but that it has that end goal that, we're going to make a better decision to put these better varieties out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the main investments that the SaskBarley as organization is investing in tied directly to variety development. So that those investments are flowing down through this system all the time.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, we've got basically, you could say, without getting too technical, we've got 2.5 breeders for barley in Canada. And really, it may sound like a lot to some, but that's not very many breeders to keep going for the barley industry. So we want to support them as well because we want them to maintain being able to do their work and everything that gets done in the meantime in the industry too. And, it doesn't stop at plant research or disease research or variety research. Some of the research could involve some of the markets too, right? One is just as important as the other. So want to make sure that they're all looked at.
So you're a director on SaskBarley. You're a farmer from Northeast Saskatchewan. Why is it important for you as a farmer, not aside from your role as a director, but just taking that director hat off for a minute and speaking as a farmer from Northeast Saskatchewan? What's your perspective on your role at PRCOB? Is it altruistic in that you're there and you're supporting the betterment of the industry? Do you get some direct benefit as well in seeing what's coming up for potential varieties on your farm? Where does that fit when you're spending your time going out to these meetings?
It's really neat to see like the amount of time, effort, and varieties that are put into the system initially. Before I started, I didn't realize that the volume was that high or there's that many. So that was neat to see. And yeah, for sure, you get to see some varieties that may be put in there and get tested, and then they don't meet the criteria so that they're taken off, and get to see all that. But I look at those meetings and those comparisons that we do as a farmer, because the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, if I'm going to take this variety and put it on my farm, how's it going to react? Who am I going to sell it to? What's the price I'm going to get, which of course is a moving target. But you take all those into consideration, and then there's people from industry who are buyers. There's people from industry that are sellers. There's brokers. Everybody has a little part and parcel in the whole chain of the barley industry, and everybody has their own, advantage, right? As a farmer, obviously disease and agronomics and quality are really important, but as a maltster, they may not be as concerned about what the lodging of it is on a variety because they want more on the quality, right? So you have to push and pull with some of those. And yeah, I actually enjoy going to these with the farmer hat on and say, hey, is this the benefit of the farmer? Would this benefit on my farm? Would it be a benefit on my neighbor's farm or into the next province? And try and make the opinions based on that, because there's just so many things that are important with these decisions that are made that, we got to be able to produce it to start with. So it's got to start on the farm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really critical to have farmers there. It keeps all the discussions really well grounded.
Yep. And then there's conversations that happen that maybe people are part of the industry or research, and they don't have the farm background, that they didn't grow up on the farm, and they don't understand certain processes that happen. And so it's just nice to explain that and have somebody to be able to verify all that when those decisions are made.
Yep. Any final thoughts on the variety registration system, PRCOB, or anything we've talked about today?
Yeah, it's a great system. I guess probably the only thing I would say is that depending on the year and where you're located, it's hard to try and move from one variety to the next if you're just looking at specifically yield. And yes, that's obviously important in any crop that we grow. We want more bushels because it should be more profitable. But it's interesting if you put the shoe on the other foot, and if you said, let's take barley, for instance, whether you grow 60 or 80 or 100 bushels or whatever your number is, everybody would still prefer to grow a variety that maybe only yields, 20 bushels an acre. But if we could get paid $30 a bushel for that, think of the difference in time and management and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's an extreme level, but that's also where you got to look at it the other way and say yield isn't everything. If I can grow a particular variety, maybe a specific variety that's only available to a certain buyer, and I can get 50 cents a bushel or 75 cents a bushel premium, but I'm only going to be producing 8 or 10 bushels less than my neighbor with the other variety, that still may be more profitable for me and work better on my farm. So yield is very important, don't get me wrong, but putting all those considerations into effect are how the game is played, and all part of the puzzle. So just, I guess, would caution that way when switching varieties. Just make sure that you've talked to the buyers. Maybe you want to talk to guys at SaskBarley or CMBTC or somebody else that's on PGDC and see, have you tried these varieties? Where is the market? What contracting options are available, and do it that way, because then at least you got a home for it at the end. And you don't want to set yourself up for a scenario where you've got this great product, but there's nowhere to sell it because we don't have the market established for it yet.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. All right, one last question for me. If you're going home after you're up here recording this and talking to a neighbor and they asking what you were doing in Saskatoon, and you tell them I recorded this podcast, and What would be the one sentence that you would tell them as to say why it would matter to them to give it a listen?
A lot of farmers are unaware of the pieces and the steps that happen to get these new varieties from the cross into the producer's hand. I think it's good to listen to just to get the details on how the system works. And the Prairie Recommending Committee for Oats and Barley takes care of all of that and follows all those steps and maintains the quality that we have here. And I think just explaining it and going through the details opens the guy's eyes up about how this isn't going to happen overnight. There is a process, and it's all for the betterment to maintain what we've got here in the provinces.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chad. And thanks for taking the time to join us here today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Mitch.
But season 3 of the podcast isn't over yet.
Thanks for listening to the Barley Bin. Rate our podcast, subscribe, and tell a friend to tune in wherever you listen to podcasts. Brought to you by SaskBarley, because it's time to get in the bin and get itchy.
Produced at
Sound Lounge by T-Bone.